magic does remind us of things we're in danger of forgetting. Not only that the world is a mysterious place, but look, that life is full of surprises. Here, this is a folded piece of paper, and it's about, I would say, half an inch thick. And if I take the rubber band off, I can show you what it actually is, which is a bag, a paper bag. And inside this folded, thin paper bag, we have what? Well, we have a glass of liquid. In this case, it is iced coffee. Cheers. And so magic reminds us that life is full of surprises.
And some magicians will go to any lengths to create a surprise. America's most celebrated dinner table magician of the early 20th century began his career as a close-up magician in the roughest bars of New York's Bowery.
Now then, the reason you're here is you're going to see some magical effects, because this guy we're talking about today is called Mellini, Max Mellini. Pretty heavy.
Paul Daniels became fascinated by Max Mellini when he discovered that Mellini had innovated many of today's classic close-up tricks.
I decided to put together a show about Max Mellini because if you're a keen magician and you're a keen historian and not just a trickaholic, what's the next trick? You will find Mellini written about in glowing terms in these old magazines and books. If you want to picture him in your mind, he looked a bit like Napoleon or Al Capone. And he was born in the late 1800s. He had a very guttural accent. He was from the Polish-Austrian border. And when he was 4, his family moved to New York. And Max Mellini's magic essentially was all close-up. And the reason it was all close-up was because he never did anywhere much bigger than this. It was mostly for the wealthy of the world. He would set up shows in the best hotels, and he would just travel the world, and I mean the world. You go, chink-a-chink, chink-a-chink, chink, and one of them would jump from here to over there. And then, just when you thought, what? He'd go, chink-a-chink, chink-a-chink, chink, chink, and it would jump from here to there. You just get the idea now, yes? So he would go, chink-a-chink, chink-a-chink, chink, chink, and it would jump from here to there. It's fascinating, isn't it? It was extraordinary to me to find the things that he did that I just took for granted, that he'd started. Watching here, chink-a-chink, chink-a-chink, chink, chink. You looked in the wrong place. It's over here. and then chink, 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 and they would all be over there, and that would be Chink Chink by Max Mellini. Mellini, he was famous for a thing called the colour change, amongst many other things. But the colour change didn't necessarily mean the card changed colour. His hands would bounce like this across it, like that, and he would change to a different card. All right, but I couldn't figure that out because Max couldn't have done that. Because his hands were so small, they were only this big, size 5 glove, I don't think he used that method or the one that came out in 1905 where he said, look at that card with 4 of spades, it would change to the 8 of clubs, and his hands would still be empty. If he'd been around in the 1970s, which he wasn't, when a fella came along called Paul Daniels and came up with that one, which is very clean and leaves absolutely nothing anywhere. I don't think he could have done that because of the size of his hands. So the only thing that in my research was able to come up with was there was a Dutchman around at the time called Okito, and he would do this. And it was a kind of pachung, and the card would change. And Mellini must have done that one, I think. It's because the only one his hands would fit. But we'll never know.
One of the most interesting things about magic is that people seem to fail to realise about preparation. People assume that everything you do is on the spur of the moment.
There's a hell of a lot more work goes into the preparation of a split-second effect than meets the eye.
Mellini was that was his whole being, that he would spend hours and days, perhaps even months or years, preparing for a trick.
Mellini's wealthy patrons invited him to fashionable dinners, where he sat amongst the guests and performed amazing tricks, some of which were to become legendary.
Now, there's a story about Max Malini going to an exclusive dinner party, probably at a stately home, or, you know, they're sat there in the ballroom. You can imagine everybody sat around the table, all expectantly waiting for the main course. And meanwhile, he's doing a few tricks and just being his normal self. And he somehow managed to steer the conversation around to the fact that he was able to raise the dead.
And that he will prove it. Because, of course, as soon as they challenge him and say, well, that's nonsense, he says, I'll prove it.
And basically the main course arrived, and you imagine them with big silver cloche. They lift that off the table, and there's this beautiful turkey. Some people say a goose, but it was definitely a turkey.
And he takes the knife, makes his sort of manoeuvres over this goose, prods it, and the goose comes back to life.
Runs round the table, everybody's screaming, the place in disarray, and clears off.
And what he had done was he had taken a live goose and plucked it.
Tucked its head under its wing. You know, you can hypnotise birds relatively easily, strangely, and put that on the table. So, you know, whether that actually was true or not is kind of irrelevant. Malini was just that sort of guy where stories like that abounded about him because he was such a character.
Max Malini, short, not as good looking as me, you know, and stuff like that. The biggest question in his show was the trick you're about to see, okay? What he used to use is a hat. And to be honest, to show the detail I've gone to for you, I have used an Austrian hat, for real, okay? And he used to use a coin, all right? That's it. Now what you've got to do is, first of all, your name's Lindsay, isn't it? Lindsay, go in the hat, look around, make sure there's no more coins in the hat. You can pull out the brim, you can do what you like with it, but you know, you've got to get it right. All right? Have you done that? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah? Okay, I'll have the hat. You make sure that that is not a double-headed coin. In other words, it's just a normal coin. Yeah? Happy? Yeah? Normal coin. Now, what I'm going to do is this. Can I check that? I'm going to spin it. Right. Heads or tails?
Tails.
Pick it up. Yeah, it's a block of ice, isn't it? Yeah.
By the time Malini was performing hat tricks at exclusive parties, the hoi polloi could get their magic fix for a few pennies or a few cents. For by the middle of the 19th century, Fawkes's multi-act sideshows had evolved into the music hall or vaudeville in the USA. Magicians would perform short routines in theatres, alongside singers, acrobats, and performing dogs. Magicians toured from music hall to music hall, honing an act which didn't change in years. This was the birth of the modern magic routine. One of the most subtle presenters of such a routine was Richard Pitchford. Better known by his stage name Cardini, he performed his delicate and complex act wearing gloves.
Cardini's act is just layered and layered and layered with surprises.
He portrayed a slightly inebriated English gentleman beginning to make his way home from a rather happy night out in his club.
Cardini was just a brilliant actor. There was a subtext going on in his mind. You can see as he's performing that he's surprised by all this wonderful stuff going on, and he gets annoyed by it.
You see, he didn't just produce playing cards. They suddenly appeared in his hands and he'd throw them away, and they would still be there. No sooner had he thrown the cards away than he'd find a cigarette in one hand and a cigarette in another, and if he placed the first cigarette in his mouth, then there'd be a third cigarette. Where were all these cigarettes coming from? He was a man in total confusion.